I'm starting out in this lesson just by opening up one of the files that are in the PS06 lessons folder. So you can see that I can go to Browse to Bridge, find that folder on my desktop that I've created by dragging off the folder from my DVD and selecting PS0601. So I have this very vibrant image open at this point. But what if I wanted to print this image? So you've got a couple choices here. Use it on screen, use it in print. So a couple things that you want to consider: how it looks and what your color settings are set at. So if I go to Edit Color Settings, you'll see that I'm set at North American General Purpose 2. I talk a lot more about these color settings in the next lesson based on color correction. And here I want you just to change this to North America Pre-Press 2. Nothing happens to your image, and frankly, I would recommend not looking at your screen to see if your color is correct, but there is something that you can do to get you a little bit closer to a more realistic look for your image. If you press Command Y on the Mac or Control Y on the PC, you'll see that it puts you into a color proofing view. So you'll see that under View, Proof Colors is there, and the proof setup is based upon working CMYK, which is what I just selected when I went into the color settings. I said pre-press settings. So by pressing Command or Control Y, I can work in Photoshop, staying in the RGB mode, but seeing what my image is going to look like when it actually comes out of the printer or I send it to a printer to go on the brochure. So keep that in mind as you're working, and you might want to put that preview on because typically you want to do your painting and retouching in the RGB mode. And if you must convert your image to CMYK, that's something that you want to do at the very end of your project. Now I'm going to go ahead and close this file, and I'm going to create a new file that's just at the default Photoshop size and click OK. The reason I'm doing this is because I want to teach you some basic painting techniques. I'm selecting my brush. I'm pressing D to make sure that my black and white colors are selected down here. That takes you back to the default colors. That's where D comes from. And you'll notice that if I just start painting, I have a default brush size and softness. Now, of course, I can go up to my options and I can change my brush size and select different brush tools. But what I want to do is go back and select just a normal brush. There's my radius right there, you can see. And I want to increase the size. So just by looking down at your keyboard at the letter P, you'll see brackets off to the right. And if you press the right bracket, you can increase your brush size. Left bracket, you can decrease your brush size. Now I'm having you practice on this new document so that you don't mess up anything that you're actually working on. So next I want you to make it softer. If I hold down the Shift key and I press that left bracket, I now have a softer brush. Shift right bracket, I now have a harder brush. Couple other little tricks. If I click and I release, and then I shift click, I can connect one point to another. This will help you later when you start working in masks. The next thing I can do is shift and drag, and that will keep the stroke constrained to a perfectly straight line. Now next, what if I want to change the opacity? I can simply press 5. This brings me to a 50% opacity. You can see that I can add or build as I'm working with that. If I type 75, I'm at a 75% opacity. If I press 1, I'm at a 10% opacity. 1, 2, I'm at a 12% opacity. So by typing in the value, you can instantly change the opacity, or you can come up to the slider and change your opacity here. If you want to quickly and easily return back to 100%, press 0. That always takes you back. Now next, I'm just going to show you a little bit about blending modes, and then I'm going to apply them to another image. I'm going to the color panel and I'm selecting a color, and you'll see that when I paint it's opaque, but that I can change the blending mode up here in the options panel where it says mode, and perhaps I want to change this to multiply. That gives me the effect of a magic marker. But you can choose lots of different methods. For instance, color, which won't change anything unless there's some gray in it, and you'll see that the white's not changing and the black's not changing, but yet the feathered part of my stroke is, and anything gray is changing to that blue. So you can experiment with all of those different blending modes for different effects. I'm going to go ahead and close this file and not save it because it looks really bad. And I'm going to go back to File, Browse and Bridge, and I'm going to open up the PS603 and the PS604 images by selecting one, shift-clicking on the other, and double-clicking on one of them. Now, since I went and changed my color settings, the defaults for alerting me when I have a profile mismatch come up. I'm just going to click OK on these. I'm also going to click on Arrange and put these as 2 up vertical. Okay, it doesn't really matter whether yours appears on the left or the right. We're just going to use color from this image to paint this image. And what I want you to see is that I'm still on the brush tool, but if I hold down my Option key, I can sample a color from anywhere in my image. And you'll notice that when I Option click on this cheek, you're seeing the color that's being selected. It's showing me a little preview there. And you'll also see it's added to my foreground color. Now, if I come over to this image and I select a larger brush, so I'm selecting a larger brush, shift left bracket to make it a little bit softer, you'll see that if I start painting, it's giving me a gray opaque color, not what I wanted at all. So I'm going to undo that. And what I'm going to do is go under Image Mode and change this to RGB, even though it won't change the way it looks. But now I have the ability to add color. I'm also going to make sure that my blending mode is set for color. As you saw in the little painting sample that I did earlier, when I choose color, all the grayscale remains intact, but I can add a color. Now, if I do this right now, it's very, very colored. I don't want that effect either. So I'm pressing Command Z on the Mac or Control Z on the PC, and I'm selecting the opacity and bringing it down to about a 20%. Now don't forget, I could have easily just pressed the number 2 to go to 20% as well. But now I can paint this color in a little bit better. So you can see I'm sampling this skin tone from the original image and then replacing it. Now keep in mind that when you have this set at a different opacity, you can actually build up the color. So if I go under his eyes, you'll see it gets darker there. You have to be careful because you don't want to create a really splotchy look when you do this. So I'll just stay away from those areas that I already painted. Make my brush size a little bit smaller and swipe in a little bit under his eyes. Now if I want to color his hair, I already have my settings set up. I just need to now sample that color. So I go click on the other image. You can click up on the tab if you're afraid you're going to click on the image itself. I'm Option clicking to sample that brown color. Clicking on my image again. And this time when I paint, it's a little bit too light. So I'm going to go ahead and increase this opacity. You can experiment with this and set your settings for whatever you want in order to test coloring your image. I'm using my right bracket only to make my brush size larger so I can quickly color this in. Now I don't have to sample images in order to get my color. I can also go just pick an image from my swatches panel or my color panel, because what if I want to color his eyes in this unnatural blue? I can do it that way as well. So I'm doing a Command Option Z on the Mac or Control Alt Z on the PC to undo the eye color so that I can choose a lighter opacity. And maybe paint those a little bit better. But again, you can see all the grayscale remaining intact. Sample the lips. If I want a little bit more color, I could add to that. And again, just by playing with your brush size, making it smaller, larger, increasing the width, and changing the softness and hardness, you can get a totally different effect to your image. Make a really big brush, and with that little bit of red color, I'm going to make a really soft edge by pressing Shift to left bracket, change my opacity all the way down to about a 5%, and just add a little bit of color to the cheek. So in this lesson, you found out how to use some of the tips and tricks for painting. I took one of these samples a little bit further than it was in the book, but I wanted to show you how, without going to the brushes panel, you can easily change the settings and work quickly while you're painting.